You are listening to Historyman, the platform for historians, authors, and museum directors to tell their stories of the American Revolution. Walk in the footsteps of heroes and proclaim freedom reigns. On today's episode, we are with Steve Sudderth, author of The Trails Through Time, A History of the Blowing Rock Area, 1400 to 1900. Steve, welcome.
Glad to be here, Eric.
Steve, we actually did an episode. It covered hundreds of years of this area of the country. We talked about the Watauga settlement being, they called it the over the mountain regions for a reason. It literally was over the mountains. They actually jumped over some Cherokee land and bought some land or leased some land from the Cherokee Indians and established this settlement. And then the regulator movement kind of, after that happened, all of a sudden you had the population just grow in this new settlement of the over the mountain men. And we talked about the different nationalities that were tied into there. You had the Huguenots, you had the Scotch-Irish, you had some Irish, you had some English. You just had a whole group of different influences in this community. But one thing that kind of held them all together was this threat of a Cherokee uprising that was fueled by the British, correct?
Yes.
And then once the Revolutionary War really kicked into high gear and the British were fueling the Cherokee hate by providing arms and ammunition to the Cherokees to fight against settlers, it became almost a two-front war with the mountain people who were patriots.
Yes, it did. The Cherokee Uprising against the settlers actually started before Lexington. You had forts that were built around North Carolina. The first one would be in the Wachovia settlement, which is now Winston-Salem, which was the Moravians. You had another fort built around 1765, Fort Dobbs, which is now in Statesville, North Carolina. Then you had Fort Isaacs, originally built, now called Fort Defiance, on just northeast of Lenoir, North Carolina, along the Yadkin River. You had Fort Crider or Grider, which was in what's now downtown Lenoir. You had Cathy's Fort, named after a gentleman by the name of Cathy, that was along Anderson Creek or the North Catawba River, just north of Marion. And then you had another fort built at what's now Old Fort, North Carolina. They've actually built a replica of the fort right next to Interstate 40. And then you had Quaker Meadows, a fort built there at some time by Charles McDowell. Then when these Indian uprisings started in the late 1760s, everybody would congregate. And then you had, of course, Fort Watauga over in what's now Tennessee, Elizabethton area. And one of the reasons that the British urged the Cherokee to rebel was because of the proclamation line and the fact that Richard Henderson had actually gone over there and purchased that land from them. The state of North Carolina and the state of Virginia passed laws, because they weren't sure at that time if they were in North Carolina or Virginia, but they passed laws saying that the transaction was null and void.
So it sounds like there was a whole bunch of different storm clouds rising up against the settlers in this area and just over the mountains. And we talked a little bit about how they communicated with the different settlements. And you said the only way to communicate was really by horse, right?
Correct.
So it leads me to the story. I ran across this story of Martin Gambill. I ran into some of his family in Mooresville, and they were telling me about their family history, and this is a family story that's been passed down and they are very proud of. So you have insight on Martin Gambill and maybe someone else that was with him when Ferguson was coming up into this region and shouting threats to everyone in the over the mountain region that led up to Kings Mountain. So I'm sitting back and listening on this one.
1780 was a monumental year in the American Revolution in the Southern Campaign. The Patriots had lost Camden, the Battle of Camden. General Sumter had been routed, and Cornwallis was on the march to come up from South Carolina and into North Carolina. And General McDowell had sent a group into South Carolina in July to skirmish, and they had met some Tories or militia. They met in several battles, and they found out that and Colonel Shelby was one of the ones that was leading the Patriot forces along with Colonel McDowell, Charles McDowell. And they found out of a threat by Major Patrick Ferguson that he was going to come across the mountains and basically kill them and destroy all of their property and stuff. Colonel Shelby, who found out about Ferguson's threat, he rode to Fort Watauga on Nolichucky River, and Colonel Charles McDowell was tasked with notifying the Patriots in Wilkes and Surry County. And he enlisted several riders. There is a story that signal fires were used, but I haven't found any evidence of that from original sources. I found secondary sources that say signal fires was used, but I have not found anything of that we could call original source material. And Colonel Charles McDowell sent out riders, express riders, to notify the Patriots in Surry County and Wilkes County of the approach of Ferguson, and the plan was for everybody to meet at Quaker Meadows.
Quaker Meadows is where?
Morganton, North Carolina.
Okay.
The first express rider that we know of he sent out was a James Blair, whose family lived in what's now Caldwell County in the Cedar Valley area. And Jimmy Blair was like 17, 18 years old, and he mounted his horse to ride up to what's now Ashe County in Wilkes County to notify the Patriots that they were to meet at Quaker Meadows. Along his route, he was wounded. He notified Ben Cleveland. Ben Cleveland sent him to his farm, which was his farm in what was called Big Glades in what's now Watauga County in the Deep Gap section, was a meeting place. And at that meeting place is where he met Martin Gambill. And Martin Gambill, in his ride to notify Patriots.
Where's Big Glades? Right, modern day, where's Big Glades?
It's in the Todd area.
Todd,
North Carolina. It's on the Watauga, Ashe County lines along the New River.
Okay.
And at that point, Martin Gambill rode. They don't know his exact route, but he rode north, notifying the people in the New River area of North Carolina and Southwest Virginia. His route took him to what was called through the mouth of Wilson to a place that was known as Osborne's Fort. And he followed Fox Creek up through Troutdale near where Hurricane Campground is. And he ended up at 7 Mile Ford near Chilhowie, Virginia, along the middle fork of the Holston River.
How many miles is that?
I do not know, but it's a ways.
It's got to be over 100 miles.
Oh, yeah.
My understanding, he did it like in 48 hours.
Yeah,
two horses were killed under him.
Yeah.
And he finally finished it on the third horse.
Yeah. It was pretty amazing. I'm vaguely familiar with his story, but James Blair Jimmy Blair, he fought with the Patriots throughout the war, and he got he notified all the men of Surry County, and Colonel Ben Cleveland, he rallied Ben Cleveland and 350 Patriots, as well as notifying Martin Gambill.
How far did he run?
He rode probably not as far as Martin Gambill, but he'd been shot.
Who shot him?
A Tory.
A Tory shot.
Ambush. It was an ambush. And eventually he moved down to northern Georgia. He served in Congress. They named Blairsville, Georgia after him. A Thomas More, a historian from Tennessee, actually wrote a poem in the 1800s about the Ride of the Rebel, as it was called. And he wrote, "The race of the rebel, wilderness run, the race for a nation just begun. You will find it not on the gilded page, but on King's Mountain, starlit stage. Over the border the British came, their jackets red as the sun. City and hamlet had felt of the fall from the flash of the redcoat's gun. Over the border Ferguson rode, he never rode back again. For Jimmy Blair his horse bestrode and galloped with might and main. To Cleveland and to Campbell's tent, over the hill and over the valley he sped. And he roused the Patriots as he went, as Gabriel would rouse the dead. Go for your country's life, he said, and away like a ghost he was gone. Riding from morn to midnight on to morn, oh, never was a race like that since gallant steed was born." And but that was 18th century Thomas Trotwood Moore's poem about Jimmy Blair. And James Blair married Elizabeth Powell from the Powells of Watauga, or Caldwell County at the time. And when he moved to Habersham County, Georgia, where Blairsville, Georgia is, he actually surveyed out, and it's still to this day called the Blair Line. It was the line between the Cherokee Nation and the state of Georgia. And it was on the Tallulah River. And then he brokered a lot of different treaties between the Cherokee Indians and the state of Georgia. And he ended up becoming a senator from Habersham County. And even though he spent 20 years in state legislature, he moved to Alabama and passed away there in 1839, I believe it was. Yes. And that was
the Paul Revere's of the Southern campaigns.
That's what people called him, the Paul Revere of the South.
And like Paul Revere, there was more than one of them.
There was more than one of them. Martin Campbell. I've been familiar with James Blair from a family connection for years, but Martin Gamble's something that's recent to me.
So, Steve, tell us again how they can get a hold of your book.
You can get it online at steve-sudderth-books-square.site. Or they can buy locally at Caldwell County Heritage Museum, the Wilkes County Heritage Museum, locally at Footslogger's Boone or Blowing Rock, Deerfield Pharmacy Boone, Sunset Teas in Blowing Rock, or the Blowing Rock itself.